Welcome to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blain. I interview leaders, experts and business professionals from around the world who are bringing leadership principles and know-how into the digitally driven 21st century workplace, with focus firmly on the how-to rather than the what. Each episode is in aid of a charity chosen by my guests, and since 2020, we've made donations to over 80 global and local causes. My guest for today's Rethink Leadership podcast is Vanessa Thompson, the Managing Director of the Sustainability Experts from San Francisco, California. Vanessa has worked in sustainability and finance for the past 10 years at organisations such as the UN Foundation, the Nature Conservancy, the World Bank, JLL Spark Ventures and numerous Silicon Valley startups. Her own podcast has hosted Olympian Venus Williams, Eric Schurenberg, former CEO of Inc.com and Forbes Magazine, Philip Hoare, Chief Operating Officer at Atkins Realis, and Lisa Neuberger Fernandez, the former Head of Innovation at Accenture. Her own innovative book will be released next year, redefining how sustainable leadership can accelerate business innovation. Vanessa argues that we're in a new kind of world of life and business, and the increasing need is for more leaders to emerge who model the knowledge, skills and values required today for our planet, people and profitable businesses. It's a balance we can achieve. So let's hear more. Hi Vanessa, thanks so much for joining me. And I know you're an amazing podcast host yourself, so I'll be looking for some tips after this as well, and I'm be on my best behavior. So do tell us about yourself, your expertise and your passions.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. I'm excited for this conversation. But yeah, one of the things that I'm really passionate about is business innovation, but also sustainability. And that's been true throughout my career. I've really kind of put that at the forefront of what drives me and what makes me feel passionate. I actually started out in biofuels. So originally we were working on a NASA-based technology that we spun out to become our own firm. And it was a carbon neutral biofuel that wouldn't compete with agriculture. And it was this fantastic technology. And it was really this wonderful case study for me in how sustainability can actually drive innovation and drive business growth within an organization. And so that was a really wonderful experience for me. And later I worked at the UN Foundation and the World Bank and the Nature Conservancy, and most recently at Joby Aviation, which is one of the recent SPACs in Silicon Valley. And they work in electric aviation, or eVTOL, which is an incredibly innovative technology as a transportation solution, which is wonderful. And 2 years ago, a book publisher reached out to me and asked me to write this book on innovation, which drove me down this kind of rabbit hole to learn about why is it that all of these sustainable organizations are able to innovate faster than their competitors? Why are they able to bring IP to market quicker? Why are they able to grow faster than their counterparts? What is it about a sustainability mindset or a sustainability framework that's able to drive business growth and innovation in the business? So that developed the book with over 60 case studies of real life successful companies that have used sustainability as a framework to drive innovation in the business. Now, they may have started out not sustainable at all and not innovative at all and made a pivot, or maybe they started out with that as their original intention. But it was interesting to kind of develop these 60 case studies. So that kind of dove me into the last piece of my career most recently. And I also, as you mentioned, have my own podcast on a similar topic of innovation and sustainability as well.
Fantastic. Well, suddenly I feel like I've achieved nothing in my life.
Oh, that's
but let's go on. Actually, just let me pause for a moment. Could you give us the title of your book and where people can get hold of it?
Yes. So the title of my book is Accelerate Innovation. You can sign up for the wait list on our website, which is the-sustainability-experts.com. And our podcast title is The Sustainability Experts. And we have wonderful guests come on in each episode. It's really for people who have no background in innovation or sustainability, just to learn about these case studies. And so the first episode, we had Venus Williams come on. She, in addition to being an Olympian, also runs environmental businesses and innovative businesses herself. So she came on as a business leader. We've had other incredible guests, each one taking on a different topic within a different industry. So that's a little bit about our podcast to try to help people understand how can innovation and sustainability help accelerate my business.
Great. Well, thanks for sharing that, Vanessa. And it is a new kind of world,
Hmm.
disruption, innovation, and as you say,
Hmm.
sustainability, driving the agenda at board level, driving it at senior leader level
Yeah.
as well. And therefore we need a new kind of leader to take
Yeah.
it forward. So can you explain a little bit in a little bit more depth those topics
Yeah.
and what the
Yeah.
data is telling us to inform the leaders perhaps tuning in around their must-dos?
Absolutely. Well, I think that, sustainability and innovation are really at the forefront for leaders now. I mean, they have investors and customers and employees all breathing down their neck to suddenly start to include all of these, not only sustainability metrics, but also innovation. I mean, markets themselves are getting more competitive day by day, and Fortune 500 companies don't stay Fortune 500 companies for as long as they once did. So there's a lot of pressure on leaders to be able to continue to innovate and also to think about that in a way that's also sustainable too, sustainable for the firm as well as sustainable for the earth. And there's some interesting, takeaways we've taken away from the research in the book, which is how do we deconstruct what a successful leader is in the scope of kind of the Silicon Valley innovation that we've seen, successful, innovative leadership that's both sustainable, that's innovative, all of these things. How can we dissect what are all of these traits, right? And it's two surprising things, actually. One of them is mission, creating this sense of moon mission for your employees and for your team. It really cannot be done. Innovation cannot be done without this unwavering sense of motivation, right? This is not just showing up to work and trying your hardest. This is something that's almost existential, right? A lot of these firms, they're trying to redefine markets, redefine countries, right? This is something that has to be a mission that's within each and every one of the employees for them to try hard enough to innovate at that level. So one of the things is mission. The other is surprisingly constraints. And these have to be the right constraints, but there's been a lot of research around synthetic constraints and also having the right amount of constraints. So oftentimes what happens in big companies is they come kind of complacent. Business gets good and they start to just get into the same ways of doing things. Innovation ends up becoming just marginal improvements on the same product, right? Not these big breakthroughs that we see. And in order to kind of drive out complacency, which is kind of the death of the company or the death of the innovation, you have to have some level of constraints. Now, they have to be the right constraints, and they can't be too many constraints. It has to be just right. But what we often see with these very innovative startups is, they're five brilliant engineers in their mom's garage coming up with this brilliant idea and one leader kind of leading them towards that. And there has to be some level of constraints in order to drive out that complacency. And I think there's one really great example of this. And I'll use the respirator market, which is a medical devices market, as an example of this. The respirator market is a $7 billion industry. It's this huge industry that derives these respirators that help people breathe if they get pneumonia. And oftentimes they're around $15,000. But in a lot of parts of the world, for a lot of hospitals, that's out of the question in terms of cost. And Dr. Chisti, who's this incredible doctor, was in one of these hospitals. And during the first 30 days of his residency, 3 infants died in his arms from childhood pneumonia because they could not afford these respirators. Now, this is the leading cause of death of infants around the world. It's a huge issue. And Dr. Chisti, after this, really had this unwavering sense of motivation. I mean, that will really give it to you, this moon mission type level of innovation and motivation toward really change something. And he had this constraint of cost. His constraint was costs. And he could not afford this $15,000 respirator. So he and his team at the hospital, he led this team to push to create the first $3 respirator. $15,000 to $3 respirator. I mean, that's an incredible breakthrough innovation. Now, this is a huge market. And there's plenty of brilliant doctors in it. He's not the only one who's a brilliant doctor with an incredible team, but he was the one that was the most motivated and had the constraints to say, we're going to throw out the old model and we're going to reimagine this. So the constraints actually help you throw out the old ways of thinking and push for an entirely new way of thinking. And without that constraint, it's very difficult to do that. So actually, the two surprising things we've seen from the data are constraints and having that sense of mission.
And that makes a lot of sense for me. And I think with that sense of mission, I wrote the word down, meaningful mission here.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
and with where you were talking, that seemed to fit. And the
Mhm.
constraints make a lot of sense in two ways to me. First of all, the boundaries that we're in so that we're not just having 6,000 ideas and trying to do
Yes,
them all, trying to
absolutely.
contain it. But then
Yeah,
this driver of this creation of new innovation and creation of new value
yeah,
by thinking differently and challenging sort of mindsets
yeah.
is such a great example of Dr.
Hmm.
Chisti, as you talked about there.
Hmm.
So from that point of view, in terms of what the
Hmm.
data's telling us, I'm going to get down to
Hmm.
the persons themselves, the Dr.
Yeah,
Chistis in our
yeah.
businesses, the leaders that are there. What are these, if you can boil them down to traits, the game changing traits, habits,
Hmm.
call them what you will, that
Yeah.
leaders need to adopt to successfully successfully drive this level of thinking across the whole leadership team in the organization, but
Hmm.
also make it happen.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think like you mentioned, this is, really the time that leaders do have to really start thinking about how can they engage this workforce? How can they do all of this? How can they engage a team? And I think the number one thing we've found is the ability to listen. And the ability to listen to your team, everyone on your team. And that's not just within your organization. Sometimes it's all of your stakeholders. Sometimes it's the community surrounding your business as well, too. And there's one really great, I think, leadership case study on this too, and it's called Red Sea Global. And they're a hotel chain. They develop hotels and they construct various tourism activities in Saudi Arabia and all over the world. And they said, we're going to actually try to lead in order to distinguish ourselves in the tourism industry. We're going to actually listen as our kind of distinctive competitive advantage to the local communities around us and bring that into our hotel experiences and into our business. And they listened to the local communities and they realized that one of the fantastic things that both the local community wanted, and it ended up being beneficial for the hotel group too, is sailing. And sailing experiences were part of the traditions of these local villages in Saudi Arabia, which actually ended up distinguishing the hotel chain from a lot of other luxury hotel chains by actually incorporating all in these cultural activities. But they started out with this very simple idea. They were going to go to the local community and they were actually going to listen. They were just going to sit down and listen to what the people had to say. And at first, it might seem outrageous from a business point of view to do this. One of the things that, the village, people wanted is they wanted agricultural land for banana farms. And they're a hotel company. I mean, how could that possibly go hand in hand? But they said, okay, we're going to do what you want. We're going to listen to you. And they put all of this investment into agricultural land, which ended up being the source of food for all of their restaurants and creates incredible dining experiences that actually got them rated even higher in terms of a restaurant experience. So it doesn't necessarily just have to come from your team in terms of these ideas for innovation. It comes from your entire stakeholder group. And because of this, unlike a lot of hotel chains that face a lot of pushback from local communities, even sometimes regulatory issues because the local community doesn't accept them, this community was, one of the first times that they really accepted them with open arms because they were actually listening. So you're able to come up with these wildly innovative ideas, but you're also able to engage people and bring them together when you listen. So I think this is one of the best traits that leaders can do to be effective in business.
And of course, that drives a level of collaboration that they couldn't have
Yes,
possibly imagined
absolutely.
before with state. And you're absolutely right. That word there is to add into the mix, be open to innovation, be open to
Hmm.
stakeholder innovation, because you don't
Yeah,
know where your next ideas are going to come from. And
yeah,
you're not going to be, you may not even be able to think of that next idea without that help
yeah.
as well. So I really see that link to that think differently and the ability to deeply listen with
Hmm.
empathy as well as with that innovation here
Yeah,
to those. And that's such a great story as well.
yeah.
Um, for those leaders that do it well, Vanessa, what are the benefits of getting it right for them, the organization, the community? But for those that aren't thinking that way, what's the cost of not making progress or actually getting it wrong?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is something where leaders really need to be listening and thinking about innovation in order for really the survival of the company. I mean, Peter Drucker once told us that we must, innovate or die. And it really is true. I mean, we must continually innovate. We must continually come up with new ideas. And I think one of the best ways to do it is, like we mentioned, bringing in all of our stakeholders and hearing everything that they have to say. And I think one of the things that's really interesting is thinking about how can we do this. And I think one of the main things in terms of getting it wrong is there's a lot of costs to getting it wrong. One of them being the fact that the organization itself might be at stake if we're not thinking about innovation. But now more than ever, I think we're also thinking about all of the problems surrounding the organization in terms of the environment and all of these social problems that are more and more becoming really relevant for organizations to think about. Sometimes their investors even pushing them to think about. And I'll give one interesting case study here where it's the benefit of thinking about this in a more innovative way. Sometimes we think about the downsides of not doing it in terms of not innovating, not thinking about the environment. There's catastrophic potential, outcomes that might come from not doing something. This is a company called True Pigments, and they're located in the Appalachian Mountains in the United States, which is famous for coal mining. And one of the toxic pollutants that comes off of coal is this toxic iron sediment that basically gets into the rivers, and it kills everything in the river. Anyone who drinks the water ends up becoming slightly poisoned and developing heart or lung issues. It ends up being just a really horrible thing for a lot of these communities. And a water treatment manager and an artist decided to partner up and found out that if they took out this iron sediment out of the water and baked it, it could be turned into paint, safe paint for painters to use. And if you bake it at different temperatures, it becomes different colors. And so suddenly it's taking this massive problem, right? This massive calamity, and actually making it not only saving lives by pulling out this toxin out of the river, but making a valuable product that's valuable for artists, and it has a unique type of paint quality that a lot of artists really desire. And so I think what's really interesting about thinking in terms of a collaborative way, thinking about the community, thinking about listening to people, is that you get to avoid a lot of these truly, I mean, we're in a catastrophic state, and think about it as a source of value. And ultimately, I think this is what innovation is all about. It's about finding a problem and finding a way to profit from it, from value creation. And so this is one incredible example of it where you're thinking about how can I take a problem that's in the world and then create value out of it.
And for me, that it's not just about value, actually, because if I go back and replay, maybe this is a little bit unfair to throw on you here, but we talked about sustainable innovation.
Mm-hmm.
What I'm hearing from you, I would argue, is something which is almost akin to the next step of that, which is regenerative innovation.
Absolutely.
Am I
Absolutely.
right?
Yes, absolutely. And there's so many incredible examples of this where we can start to think of all these problems as opportunities for the business. And it takes an innovative mindset, innovative leader to think of these things. There's examples of companies that are turning carbon dioxide pollution in the air back into car fuel. I mean, imagine pulling up your, traditional car up to the gas tank, and it was what was once pollution, what was once making you a little sick, is now the fuel in your car, and it's out of the air. There's so many great examples of this. There's even services now that are, for yacht harbors and things that need to have clean environments. There's one company that just went IPO that actually cleans up the harbor from microplastics and all of these plastics in the ocean. And it's as a service. So there's all this value creation that you can do, and sustainable innovative thinking that you can do to actually enhance your products by taking advantage of what was once a problem and turning it into an amazing business opportunity. So I think that it really takes an innovative leader, and this is why innovative leadership is so important, because we can actually take advantage of a lot of these awful situations and save life, as well as create incredible value for our businesses.
Well, isn't that just a great proposition for everybody? This
Yeah.
really puts purpose at the heart of business again and starts us
Yeah.
thinking quite differently about that dynamic between planet, people, purpose, profit,
Yeah.
those kind of things. And I do get that. I do get the sentiment because I talk a lot about regenerative leadership in the
Mm-hmm.
respect of sustainability may not be enough now.
Yeah.
We need to go that step further, and
Yeah.
these examples that you're giving me are that step further that show the
Yeah.
huge benefits that can come from that.
Yeah.
And maybe just to go back one step, for those
Mm-hmm.
leaders who are insist on being traditional leaders, getting it wrong, not putting this front and center, What's the risk?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of risks. One of the risks that I see is, we're constantly in, more and more a remote workforce, and, people are leaving. We see that, people are not staying in jobs for more than 2 years. And there's a lot of risks just associated with that aspect. So I'll just kind of hone in on that. There's a knowledge loss, there's an innovation loss, and it's very difficult to continue to pursue your company when your employees could just switch out for another competitor with just a simple, incentive like a pay raise or something like that. So it ends up being a huge cost if you do not have these missions, if you do not have meaningful work. People can suddenly just leave. And there's a huge amount of cost to this that, business leaders may not even be aware of. One of the facts is that it takes, up to a third of that person's salary just to replace them, not to mention all of the knowledge loss that comes with that. In order to really have a workforce that will stay and that will fight for your organization, you need to give them a reason. More and more, you need to give them a reason, especially when you're talking about your employees under the age of 35. More and more, these employees are completely, motivated by cause-related work. And if it's not meaningful and if it's not authentic, they'll leave and they'll share their great ideas with your competitor. And that's really dangerous for your organization. So leaders that don't really drive with a sense of meaning or innovation in the way that they speak is really difficult. There's one great example of a company that's doing this right, which is Interface, which was voted one of the most sustainable companies in the US. And they went from being a non-sustainable organization or non-innovative organization to being a sustainable organization about halfway through their journey, already when they were already a massive public company. And they get college grads that stay for decades at their firm. I mean, you never hear about bright young college grads from Ivy League schools staying at the organization for decades. It's one of the reasons why they're so innovative. And now this actually industrial manufacturing firm, which they are in the South, has now developed IP that's in Adidas and Gucci and a lot of other big brands because they're thinking about it in an innovative way, and they're actually keeping and retaining all this brilliant talent. And the risk of not retaining that talent is potentially not to be able to innovate, not to be able to create that IP.
I couldn't agree more, Vanessa. I mean, I could have this discussion all day with you. It's fascinating listening to you, and such superb examples as well. We're coming to the end of our conversation, and I know many of the leaders who are tuning in here, many leaders will be right on board with that. Many leaders will be thinking, how do I become this
Yeah.
modern leader who is able to balance purpose, people, planet, profit? I can
Hmm.
do the right thing, think about meaningful disruption, think about
Hmm.
and do sustainable innovation.
Hmm.
What could you distill down from what you've said today into 4 or 5 key pieces of advice for those leaders to take some small steps, accelerate the progress?
Absolutely. I think one of the key ones, I think I'll break down into four, which is creating a sense of trust and safety amongst your team so that they feel the ability to actually share those ideas and collaborate and work innovatively. Another one is accelerating voice, which is something which is basically the academic word for how likely is it that someone will actually share those ideas. And the last is, diversity of thought. And having that diversity of thought different is actually very, very good. And the simple ways that I'll break down how to do those things are really create a structure for innovation. So oftentimes we think, oh, innovation or sustainability, these are really great things that I need and everyone's pushing me to do, but how do I actually do it? And they'll go to their team and say, go innovate, go be sustainable, but it doesn't happen. And normally that's because you haven't created an organizational structure to support innovation or to support sustainability. So there needs to be KPIs, there needs to be incentives. You also need to give your employees time to dedicate to innovation and to R&D and to investment. Oftentimes they'll say, work on these 5, innovative projects, but they don't give them any time to do that. So it doesn't happen. So creating actual structure for innovation is really helpful. And there's one perfect example of this, and it's Pixar. Pixar is an incredibly innovative company coming up with wonderful entertainment that's been wildly successful. And they actually have physical rooms in their office for different stages of the innovation process. So one room is for all the wild and crazy ideas. It's a physical room in their office where you only have meetings for wild, crazy ideas, off the wall ideas. And so everyone who wants to share those crazy, wild ideas goes to that room. And the next stage is screening out all those ideas, narrowing down which ones we want to prioritize. And the third room in their office is implementation. How can we actually do this? How can we implement? So if you mistakenly, go into the implementation room, they'll redirect you into, the wild, crazy idea room, which is a nice way of not shutting someone down and building that trusting, safe environment, because they say, oh, it's not that we can't do that. It's that there's a different room, there's a different meeting for that. So actually creating physical structures for innovation, for building that trust and safety that accelerates innovation is actually really helpful. So taking these kind of intangible things of innovation and sustainability, try to think about, how am I going to create KPIs around that? How can I use some data sets to actually measure people's performance in terms of innovation? There's a lot of great tools out there. I would really think about, how am I going to create a structure around what I want? So I would really try to break that down into kind of, how can I create a structure on these 5 things that I want to do, which is trust, safety, and diversity, all of these things. There's a lot of great tools to utilize.
Well, that's worth me replaying a few of these things as a summary. And that platform of trust and psychological safety and real safety is key to bring out the voice, as you talked about, of everybody being able to have a voice, and that embracing a diversity of thought that flies in the face of 20th century. We must recruit in our own image. Now we must recruit for different thinking in many ways, and then structure how we work for maximum ability to innovate at all levels in a contained way, as we were talking about before. And then, of course, aligned with that, measuring innovation and sustainability value, so that you've got the why sorted as much as anything else. So excellent tips. And Vanessa, thank you so much again for joining me. I am absolutely sure that many of those tuning in will want to find out more, but also get in touch and continue conversation. How do they do that?
Yeah, absolutely. We would love to collaborate with all of them. Our firm is called the Sustainability Experts Firm, which helps businesses with innovation and sustainability services. So we're a consulting practice. We also have our wonderful podcast, if they want to tune into that, which is the Sustainability Experts Podcast. You can find us on every platform from Amazon Music to Apple Podcasts. And we're also on LinkedIn. You can also sign up for the book and the waitlist for the book on our website, which is the-sustainability-experts.com.
Great. Plenty of action for everybody. Vanessa Thompson, thanks very much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for tuning in to the Rethink Leadership podcast with me, Jeremy Blain. Please like, comment, and support us on your favourite platform, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can watch as well as listen to each episode.